So I'm the Mad Monk. I'm here at the Apocalyptic Ashram Hawkshaven, and I'm here to bring awareness to a couple of ideas that maybe we haven't realized yet. You know, we've been living in a cult year shaped by television programming and idols, and we've been led to believe a lot of things that may not be, well, they may not be true, right? They might just be beliefs. And recognizing that the word belief, B-E-L-I-E, lie, F, belief. We have to look at how words are spelled to recognize how they might have come into an experience, right? Because there's a lot of attention placed into a language, right? It communicates an idea. And that's where the belief and knowledge, or belief and a knowing, is two different things. I believe, if I believe that I'm a cat, that doesn't make me a cat, because there's certain things, like right here, this this is a cat. This is who decided they wanted to come up here onto my meditation pedestal and participate in today's talk. So if I believe I'm a cat, that doesn't mean I'm a cat. If I know I'm a cat, I have a mental disorder, right? But if, I can believe whatever I want. I mean, I could even run around and say meow. And, that's, we've been given free will to do that, right? We've been given the ability of being. That's why we're a human being. Some people want to be a cat, right? And that's okay. If you want to believe that you're a cat, go ahead and do it. That's your option. That's an option that's available to you. A lot of words are spelled similarly, and they might mean different things. Like the universe is a vastness of knowing. It's replicatable. You can copy it. You can copy it, and it works somewhere else. Of what it does. The reason I wanted to actually start this video was so there's a problem with a lot of landscapes in the world, and they're dehydrated. And the beaver is like a hydrological engineer, and the beaver is part of that divine design of helping nature thrive. Because wherever the beaver goes and builds his dams and builds his ability of holding back the water that's rushing away to the ocean, he spreads it out on the land, and everything gets hydrated. So he's bringing the water from the valleys out closer towards the peaks. And if every running water source was allowed to be engineered by the beaver, what we would have is a hydrated landscape, that there would be a tremendous amount of water being stored subsurface, just below the ground. And in that, we would have springs and little streams and creeks and all of these things that it's been rumored that we had in the past, and we see the evidence of it, but yet they're not flowing anymore. And we've allowed erosion to carry the silt from the mountains into the lowlands, and then that causes the rivers to widen every time that it rains, and the rivers turn brown, and they become strong, and they wash through the cities, and they destroy property, and they kill people. It's because it's mad. It's mad that nature is out of balance. And so I went to some meetings and I talked with county commissioners and environmental engineers and Army Corps of Engineers, and I brought some ideas that they haven't been taught in the university. And because when I grew up, I lived in the rainforest. I mean, I knew beaver. I knew where beaver lived. I knew how beaver fished. I knew how beaver built ponds so he could get fish that he didn't have to go running around in the rivers for. I mean, I learned a lot from the beaver. I spent a lot of time in nature. I mean, like in the trees and in the, I mean, there's a lot of things I don't know what they're called, but I know I can eat them. Because I saw the bear eating them, or I saw the beaver eating them. And, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot from the universe if you just pay attention, instead of tuition. I just paid attention and I learned from nature and the divine design of how water works. Water's always trying to get down. It's trying to go down because that's the way water works. Gravity. Or lack of heat that defeats gravity and then it evaporates into the sky. So water even defies the laws of gravity that man has said exist. It gets to a certain level of temperature and it dehydrates. It moves back into the hydrogen and oxygen molecules that it was formed from. Right? So when we modify the conditions of our environment and we manipulate the elements the way a divine design is intended for us to operate, like here at the Apocalyptic Ashram, Huxhaven, I have created dew point zones where the coldest air currents of the evening, they float down the hillside, right? You can watch this, or you ask any hunter, and that's what happens. Is the air cools, it drops down the edges of the landscape. Well, if you have a bowl, and you can make it out of dirt, you just dig holes. If you have a bowl, the coldest of that air will settle in that bowl, right? And it's not going to go any farther. It's just going to make that dirt really cold that's inside that hole. And if you have rocks stacked in that hole, you want air movement around the rocks. All the rocks, they cool down a lot at nighttime because you've got several hours that it's really cold in the morning. And that cools the rocks down, right? And it cools the land. In the morning, when the sun comes out, the sun starts to warm up the air, right? And so the air currents start moving up. Well, the warmest of the air currents are going to find the coldest of environments in your dew points, in your dew ponds. And so in your dew ponds, you're taking the air, and through the manipulation of temperatures and understanding how thermal mass can hold a temperature for a longer period of time, we create zones that condensation is formed. Like if you have a cold glass of water on a table and the glass didn't leak, but if it's warm on the outside, if there's a difference in dew point from what's in the glass to what's outside, it'll condensate the air from around the glass and it'll cause a ring on your flat surface. Well, if we do that in nature, we're creating a dew pond that can catch water. And then this does a lot of things. So this allows the water to be pulled from the air. Now, and also where you dig a hole, if you make little trenches go in each direction, that will divert any of the water that falls down on that land right into that hole instead of washing off the land and promoting erosion. So the other thing that this promotes is that if water is existing on the land in lots of areas, it's like if we're at a job called life and there's a drinking fountain every couple hundred feet, well, that's a pretty good deal, you know. I mean, because especially if it doesn't have fluoride and chlorine in it, if it's distilled water, that maybe has been purified by the filtration methods that the earth provides, that's good water. Anyways, we have problems with wells drying up. We have problems with fire because the dehydrated landscape doesn't have green ground cover. Have you ever tried to catch a grass lawn on fire? Well, neither have I, but I tried to catch just green grass on fire, and it doesn't burn, right? And green plants, they don't burn. They've got to be brown. Browns burn. And brown is what a lot of our landscape has become. And the trees have not been managed because we've planted our forest basically like a farm, a lot of straight grain timber so that way it can be harvested again in the future, right? It's not a natural forest anymore. It's not diverse. It's not like nature is intended. We're supposed to be experiencing a diverse experience. I mean, that's the beauty of coming here. I mean, if everybody looked and acted just like me, this would be a pretty boring place. But luckily, there's people who are entirely different than me, and some of them I'm glad to I'm glad to only know them through YouTube or a picture or something. But there's a lot of other people who I do appreciate getting to know and experience in this life. So I guess to wind this video up, when I was talking to the commissioners and the environmental engineers and the Department of the Department of Health and all these folks, they seem like people that want to fix a problem, right? So I mentioned these methods of holding the water to the land, and they said, well, the problem is that it's illegal to catch rainwater. And I was like, well, what do you mean? The beaver does this, right? And she said, well, my biggest opponent to some of these water conservation things has been the tribe. I said, see, that's a perfect example of how backwards things have got. Decades ago, the Native Americans listened and accepted what engineers from a university said, and they put dams all over the rivers. And they've listened and accepted from what university professors have said about the best way to manage the beaver population is to trap them, right? I mean, I think our government's even had bounties on beaver. And if there wasn't a bounty on beaver, well, then there was an idol that said, hey, I'd love to have me a beaver skin hat, a really fancy one that I only wear like once every 6 months or every couple of years. And so a lot of beavers were killed for their skins. This was in like the 1800s, and I mean the populations were nearly decimated. Well, the work that they did lasted a long time to prevent having a complete devastated, deserted landscape. But in the last 100 years, a lot of creeks have started to dry up, and little streams and springs have started to dry up. We have to realize that every acre of water that is getting 1 inch of rain is like 27,000 gallons. But if that water falls quickly and it just runs off the land, that's what creates erosion. And it not soaking into the aquifer is what promotes drought and fire and famine, because now water is only available to those who can pay for it. And that's the farmers who are being subsidized by the government dollars. But they're having to grow so much food in so little space that they're using GMOs. Now they call it biologically fortified, because they don't want to call it GMO because that has such a bad name, so they just changed the name. It's like, many years ago, if I wanted to gather up some of my friends and travel to parts of the world we've never been to and kill a bunch of people, we would have called that mass murder. But now we just call it war, and there's always tax money to pay for that. There's always tax money to pay for war, but there's rarely tax money to help the poor. Right? So, what we have to realize is that things are happening because of our consent and by our free will decisions and actions in what we choose to do and support. So if we want different, we just have to do different, and that's okay. I mean, somebody can have a really bad idea, and it's only going to become something if a bunch of people agree with it. I mean, personally, if I have a bad idea, you can tell me. Say, Rob, the Mad Monk, whatever, your idea stinks. And I say, oh, okay, well, let's talk about it, because I still think it's a good idea, but if you don't think it's a good idea, tell me why, and let's figure this out, because I don't care who's right. I would rather find out what's right. And, I mean, a lot of the things that I know aren't because I just knew them already. It's because every one of you is a piece of the puzzle. And some of you are fantastically intelligent on especially one topic, right? I mean, one thing you've devoted so much time and energy to that I want to listen for like a day or day and a half sometimes of what you think on that topic, because you've studied a lot of angles of it, right? I used to drive my mom nuts talking about either bicycles or archery. It was just like I knew everything about it, and I wanted to talk about it, but it wasn't that interesting of a topic really. So, so I started focusing my energy on solving world's problems, because I said, well, if there's problems that exist, and we all are, like problem solvers, humans are pretty capable like that. If we see something wrong, we can usually come to an idea of how to fix it, So I started realizing that I'm like, well, you need to make some money. So I made some money, and I bought me a house, and then I realized, I'm like, all right, we have choices in everything that we do and support. So now I have the ability of taking my time and energy and focusing it on finding every aspect of what a problem is, kind of brainstorming. Say, okay, food, or shelter, or clean water, or transportation, or all of these little things that we pay a lot of money for to exist, and breaking them down into their subcategories, basically, and then finding that person who knows a lot about that. And then you get to learn a lot about that, because my teachers, they couldn't answer the questions I had. They'd be like, yeah, you're going to have to go to the library. And I'm like, well, shit. I'm like, there's got to be a more efficient way of doing this. And then the internet happened. I was like, wow, that's cool. So I feel the apocalypse is the unveiling of information. And an ashram is how we put that into our day-to-day use, in our minute-to-minute, our now-to-now moment. How do we implement the best ideas that we're now aware of into this life experience that we call being human? This guy is falling asleep. I don't think the camera picks him up, but he's down here sleeping in my lap. Yeah. Wildlife is everywhere. You probably have heard the birds. You got a bunch of wildlife over there in the city, too. Running around from box to box. Working their life away. Stressed out, angry, unhealthy, diseased. There are solutions. Luckily, there are solutions to every problem we face. Namaste.